The following program is being brought to you by Rain of Fire Radio, a media outreach arm of Rain of Fire Evangelical Ministries. Our commitment is to sponsor programs that will assist in living a Christian life and win others through teaching the finished work of Jesus Christ. Welcome to Delivered or Deceived with your host, Rand Berkey. Rand is a former cult member who now educates people on the dangers of these types of groups, as well as people who would seek to exploit and terrorize others. Rand has devoted his life to providing assistance to those who have been hurt. No one wants to be led through the wilderness by a guide who has never been there. He has, and his desire is that you will find yourself delivered and not deceived.
Welcome to Rain of Fire Christian Radio. Tonight our program, Delivered or Deceived, brought to you by Rain of Fire Evangelical Ministries and Rain of Fire Christian Radio, which is its outreach arm. And like I do every single time, I will start with Luke 4:17, which is one of the foundational scriptures on Rain of Fire Evangelical Ministries. And when Jesus handed the book of the prophet Isaiah, we opened the book. He found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." Christ is the message, and I'm only one of the bearers of the message. Well, we're talking about forgiven tonight. But first I'm going to tell you about a story about swimming. When I was a kid, I was young. I had to be 7 or 8, 6 maybe years old. My parents decided to enroll me, or my mom decided to enroll me into swimming lessons in a place called Firestone Park. And I got there and I didn't really do too well. I didn't like it. I didn't like what they were doing. I fought it. And I didn't like the water up my nose and none of that stuff. I didn't want to have it. Yuck. Well, later on, my parents built a home, and on part of the land that they had, they built a 2.5 acre lake. Well, there's the water. I loved to fish, and they had stocked it with fish, but the other thing I liked to learn how to do was swim. Hey, you got a lake there, you got all that water there, might as well enjoy it. Never could swim on top very good, but put me underwater, I'm like a dolphin. I'm like a seal. I'm great under the water. I could swim, yards and yards, maybe 50 yards or so underneath the water, because I liked it. Had good set of lungs too. Well, I don't know if you've jumped into a cold lake. It's miserable to try to jump into something that's going to freeze you. It's interesting that once you jump in, you get kind of acclimated to it, and it's not too bad until kind of like you get out, and then you figure out, yeah, that water was pretty cold. But the thing that I want to talk about is getting wet. Now, let me ask you, you can go into a shower, you can go into a bathtub, you can go into a lake, swimming pool, a puddle, whatever it is. And this is one of the things I want to say. You cannot get any wetter than wet. There is an absolute in everything. There's a thing called just a little bit pregnant, right? And then there's other absolutes like darkness, light. They're absolutes. Just like wet. Can't get any wetter. There's, you jump in, there's an old, I think it's Buddhist, that, some people look at the drop of water in the ocean. But the trick is to see the ocean in a drop of water. Anyway, So we're talking about forgiven. We're talking about jumping into a lake. We're talking about you can't get any wetter and wet, and that there's absolutes such as pregnancy, such as light, such as dark. And what I never want you to forget, you are forgiven. Period. The book of Hebrews is all about forgiveness. Chapter 1 sets the stage of Jesus and what he has done. It specifically is written to Jews and to Jewish believers. It seems that the Jewish believers could not let go of the law. And the next 9 chapters discuss how ultimately Jesus was the perfect sacrifice, the Passover lamb. At the beginning of chapter 10, the writer jumps from the law to faith and grace. The same issue happened in Galatia, where Paul had to put an end to the Jewish Christians who are trying to put the Gentiles under the law, somehow making them more saved. You just can't get any more saved. The problem is we are tricked into thinking we need to be. There's different attitudes on forgiveness. One of the attitudes is you need salvation plus. That means you're maybe saved, but you have to scratch, claw, limp over the finish line. I'm barely able to make it because of the constant fight for purity, even though saved. Sets the stage that is more I do, the more I can tell others what they need to do. These people are path blazers to purity, or so they think. You see, the people are never brought into the understanding of salvation, faith, and grace. It will always be in this attitude, have I done enough? They do not understand that what they have received, if they don't understand what they've received, they'll continue to be victimized by others who think they have the inside track, and will ultimately become frustrated. Or if one grovels in this ideology enough, you can be good enough to tell people what they need to do well. It's a lot of what a cult acts like, or very fundamental religions. You just can't have grace. Boy, if you have that grace, then you better watch out, because people are just going to throw caution to the wind. They're going to be sinning all over the place, so let's put a bunch of commandments there. Let's put a bunch of laws to keep those people in place. Well, how's that working for us? How's that working for a person that is trying to get out of their sin, whatever that sin is, to be saved and to not do that anymore? But what we're doing is shoving their nose back into it. I don't know. I don't think it works, shoving people's nose back in their dirt. I think what would be more beneficial is to show people, pick people up and show people the way out from that. The way out of their sin, the way out of the trouble that they're having. Not by staring at it all the time. That doesn't get you anything. Another one. I sin less than others, so I must be better than others. It's a false sense of righteousness. Salvation is based on the relative state of others. Okay, what does that say? Real easy. The place where I work work with people. I'm a supervisor, and I look at them and I say, and let's say there's about 300, 400 people in the site, and it's all stack ranked, first, second, third, based on the highest score. And I'll show them what their scores are based upon, let's say 100%, you can do 110%, and then you can do less. So they'll take their statistics and compare them against another person. This results in, okay, so especially, let's say the whole site is under 100%. So here's this individual sitting at, like, say, a 94% efficiency, for lack of a better word. They look at themselves and saying, well, I'm much more, doing much better than those people are doing less than me. Well, there's two things. There's other people that are doing more than they are, and number two, it's not about how much other people are doing, it's about getting to 100%. So you have to look at that in light of the attitude of forgiveness, the attitude of, am I more righteous or less righteous than somebody else? It's all about the righteousness of Jesus Christ, right? Has nothing to do with anybody else in the world that is saved either, because we all have the same righteousness. We're all saved. We're all forgiven. Now, there is an attitude that Jesus brought out, is that there's self-justification. We're going to be talking about that, where you can see yourself doing better than somebody else, but it's in a negative sense. The problem is with that is that there's always going to be someone more or less of anything. Like I said, the point is we're all saved. The scripture talks about this in Luke 18. And we're going to go to verse 19 through 14. I'm sorry, Luke 9, 18, 9 through 14. So it says here, Jesus spoke a parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. He said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. He said, tell me if you heard this one before. I'm just kidding. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and another a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful unto me, a sinner. Jesus said, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified, rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. It was self-justification. Hey, look, I did this, I'm justified because of my works. This guy, he ain't doing nothing, and what he has done's not good. But here, the salvation comes from his realization, the tax collector's realization of who he is, what that's about, and what he needs. Because this Pharisee doesn't think he needs Jesus. Works save you. That's the other trick that, another trick, or the trick, really. What Paul says in Hebrews, this is probably the worst attitude and completely misses the point of why Christ was crucified. If works save you, you might as well go back to sacrificing animals like they did in the Old Testament. Excuse me. One of the things that I've heard, and I think it's very good,